Fish 21. Kshatriya, the monarchy. The monarchy, defined. A king, Kshatriya, or Raja, in Sanskrit, is a man who has a divine mandate, via his counselor, that is, his spiritual preceptor, or priest, as defined in the previous chapter, to govern an area of land, and a certain portion of the sea, if the country is adjacent to a large body of water, and the human population within its borders. Obviously, this dominion includes non-human animals too, and even non-animal life, such as plants and fungi, for a genuine ruler is obliged to have a sincere concern for the welfare of all life within his protectorate, at least according to the tenets of authentic Sanatana Dharma, which, as already fully explained in the all-important 12th chapter of this solitary holy scripture, is predicated on the axiom of non-violence. A king should be the head of the military, and if it is required, courageously lead his army into battle, as opposed to cowardly scampering into a bomb shelter under the Pentagon building, as presidents of the United States of America are apt to do. A king should be a natural leader among his men, and be willing to sacrifice his life in order to protect his subjects. A virtuous monarch will take heed of astute advice from his moral guide, ideally, the wisest prophet in his kingdom, as well as his lay ministers, in order to build a just society. In a way, it could be said that a genuine monarch is akin to a particularly assertive, physically powerful brahmana, i.e., a priest or guru. Thus, the members of the two higher classes of society, the monarchy and the priesthood, are very far indeed from being commonplace men. As explicated in its glossary entry, the term divine is here not being used according to its primary definition of from, or like God or a god, but according to a secondary definition, as something that has ultimate authority, as if there factually existed a supreme deity. The word divine originates from the French language, from the Latin divinus, from divus, meaning godlike, related to deus, God. The role of the monarchy. Since a genuine monarch has effectual ownership and control over his country, he alone is authorized to divide his territory among the chiefs of each clan, known as landlords, or simply lords, for short, who will, in return, pay taxes to their king. These landlords will, in turn, apportion the land under their jurisdiction to the peasant class of society, otherwise known as proletarians, or workers, working class men, in exchange for rent, traditionally in the form of agricultural produce, but nowadays usually in money, cash. In this way, a harmonious system of cohabitation will be established, based on the natural hierarchy of human society. See also Chapter 19, regarding this hierarchical structure. A genuine monarch, king will endorse holy and righteous edicts, such as legitimate freedom of expression *, home schooling of children, a free market economy, and private ownership of all goods and services, even such infrastructure as roads, water and sewerage systems, health care, and education. Because any national administration requires a certain amount of resources in order to function, an authentic king will enforce taxation on the profits of businessmen and landlords alone, provide material support to members of the holy priesthood if necessary, and to his own guru, in particular, establish a monetary system using, or at least backed by, precious metals, and avoid interfering with the private matters of his citizens, unlike evil governments, who meddle in such things as sex, marriage, and discipline within workplaces and families. Read the entry, Freedom of Speech, in the glossary, to understand this provision, according to Dharma, law. C2, the term, legitimate. Objections to monarchy. There are but two kinds of persons who would possibly object to the institution of a genuine, legitimate monarchy. By far the greatest number of objectors are those who have very little idea of what constitutes a lawful monarchy, as defined above. The usual arguments are either, I don't want to be ruled by a tyrannical, despotic dictator, or, I don't believe monarchy should be hereditary. Obviously, neither of these arguments is applicable when the institution of monarchy is properly understood. Any man can call himself king, but if he lacks saintly, or at least noble, qualities and doesn't have the best interests of his people at heart, he is naught but a fascistic dictator. Just as a priest, by definition, is a holy man, so too should a king be a righteous and wise monarch, Raja Rsi, in Sanskrit. Perhaps two of the most important Western philosophers, the Greeks, Socrates and Plato, referred to such a sagacious ruler as a philosopher king, dynastai philosophicisi, in ancient Greek. After all, a king's primary duty is the protection of his nation, samraksa, in Sanskrit, so how could a person possibly fulfill his duty of care if he was evil and heartless? Just as a family must be protected by its head, the father, and a clan or tribe be protected by its chief, every nation requires a worthy patriarch. Unless a man has the natural proclivities to do so, he ought not follow his father's occupation. Therefore, upon the demise of his sire, a prince is not automatically qualified to assume his father's role. In fact, an actual, genuine, king will disapprove of his firstborn son seizing rulership, unless, of course, the prince was the most qualified individual available. The only valid objection to monarchy could possibly be from those miscreants who wish to destroy society via an illegitimate system of government, see Chapter 22, or those who are simply too dim-witted to understand how monarchy is the most beneficial form of governance. Any form of governance other than monarchy, by the process of simple deduction, must be controlled by either workers, businessmen, or priests, or even women. And therefore, is inherently evil, since those persons are unqualified to rule a nation. If there is no aspiring monarch extant within a nation, then the best alternative is a priest, a prophet, to be more precise, but only until a sovereign arises and retakes power. Bharatiya misconceptions of monarchy. One of the greatest misunderstandings regarding the ruling class, that is, the monarchy, at least within Indian society, is the misconception that a king is any man who happens to work as a soldier. To put it in more precise terms, in Bharata, those who are recipients of the Vedic tradition often consider any man who serves in the military to be a member of the Kshatriya class, although they invariably use the incorrect term, caste, which is an adulteration of the class and life stage system, varnasrama, in Sanskrit, mentioned in Chapter 19 of this final instruction sheet for humanity. The word caste implies a hereditary social system, which is actually a contravention of authentic Dharma. It is not only absurd, it is downright laughable, for any soldier to claim that she is a member of the ruling class, simply for being a warrior, or in some cases, due to the fact that one of her distant ancestors may have been a village chief or even a great king, Maharaja, in Sanskrit. The Sanskrit terms, Rajanya, and Kshatriya, refer exclusively to those very rare males whose vocation is to serve their nations as kings, and not simply to any man who serves in an army or navy as a warrior. All military staff, apart from the supreme commander, the sovereign, are members of the working class of society, since they are employed by the king as soldiers. The word, kshatriya, comes from the root noun, ksatra, meaning dominion, power, or supremacy, implying that one who belongs to this class of society has supreme dominion over all others. To presume that a soldier, warrior belongs to the ruling class, simply due to the fact that both soldiers and kings sometimes partake in battle is, as mentioned above, truly farcical. Therefore, if you are one of those Indians who mistakenly consider yourself to be a kshatriya, simply because you joined one of the branches of the military, or even more preposterously, due to the fact that one of your ancestors may have been the monarch of some part of ancient Bharata, kindly stop your self-delusion. You are nothing more than a silly, foolish worker. Stubborn objectors. One of the most baffling rebuttals I receive to any of my precepts is in relation to my assertion that monarchy is the only legitimate form of governance. I have seen a huge number of comments in social media platforms, in which the authors criticize various extant governments for their multifarious wrongdoings. I often respond to such comments with the whole of Chapter 22, and sometimes with this chapter, which proves, beyond any doubt whatsoever, the above assertion, that monarchy is the ideal form of governance. Those commenters, invariably, are unconvinced of the obvious wisdom of FISH, and attack my position with truly inane retorts, particularly with the claim that democracy is inherently the best form of governance, for they are unable to see the blatant fact that the cause of the aforementioned wrongdoings is precisely the democratic, sometimes socialistic, communistic system that they endorse. It is akin to saying, I know that slashing my wrists is causing my body to lose blood, but if I don't stop slashing my wrists, I will no longer bleed, so I had better keep slashing my own wrists. The stupidity is truly astounding. Even more astonishing is the number of persons who, supposedly, have read, or have listened to this chapter, in which the two most common arguments against monarchy have been annihilated, yet proceed to proffer one or both of those two arguments. Even though the definition of an actual monarch is provided above, many stubborn anti-monarchists simply refuse to accept it. They may accuse me of simply moving the goalposts, or committing the so-called no true Scotsman fallacy. A typical dialogue is as follows. Anti-monarchist. Monarchy is bad because no individual ought to have supreme power over the people. Me. Then why do you, as a father, have total power and authority over your own family? Why not allow your kids to decide who is boss? Anti-monarchist. But look at how many kings throughout history have committed atrocities against their own population. Me. If they committed such atrocious acts over their own citizenry, then they were not, by definition, really kings, but devilish tyrants. Anti-monarchist. What about all those kings in our historical records who were downright evil? Me. If they committed such evil deeds, they were not patriarchal. They failed to take care of their people like a loving patriarch, i.e., father. Anti-monarchist. Well, you're just moving the goalposts. They were still kings. They sat on a throne and ruled diverse nations and countries. Me. Absolutely not. A hammer can never be a pair of pliers. Those men were not, by definition, genuine monarchs. Anti-monarchist. But the princes who took over from their fathers also committed an enormous number of wicked crimes. Me. A man ought not assume the duties or the occupation of his father, unless he is also qualified to do so. Not every child of a great composer is automatically also a great musician. Not every son or daughter of an actual monarch is born to be a king or a queen. Anti-monarchist. What if the genuine king of which you speak somehow goes astray, and begins performing all kinds of immoral deeds? Me. That would be an incredibly rare scenario, but in such a case, the king's priest will encourage a more holy monarch to challenge him. Ad infinitum. As clearly stated above, if a sovereign does not closely adhere to dharmic principles, he is not, by any measure, an actual monarch, but merely a fascistic megalomaniac. The very same paradigm applies to members of the holy priesthood. Any man can claim to be a spiritual master, but if he lacks the necessary prerequisites listed in the previous chapter of this book, he cannot rightly be regarded as a priest. Therefore, to claim that a cleric from any particular church, temple, mosque, or synagogue has committed a grave sin such as child abuse, rape, murder, extortion, or grand theft, is paradoxical, since any man who has committed such a heinous crime was never a genuine member of the holy priesthood. Likewise, to assert that a monarch is a wicked king is oxymoronic, because if he is objectively evil, he cannot be an actual king, by definition. Conflicts are always unequal. Whenever there is conflict in this world, whether it be an argument between two persons, or a quarrel between two groups of persons, as in the case of political hostilities, it is absolutely certain that one side is more righteous than the other side. Both parties cannot be equally right, because equality is non-existent in this phenomenal sphere. Equality exists exclusively in abstract concepts such as mathematics, and arguably on the subatomic level. Unfortunately, it requires an above-average intellect in order to comprehend such patently obvious truisms. Legitimate war. Being a soldier is a legitimate and necessary occupation in this wicked and perilous world, mainly for the defense of a local population or nation, but unfortunately, not all soldiers serve a virtuous master. Not all world leaders are righteous in all their ways. In fact, you who are reading this holy scripture are almost definitely being oppressed by a corrupt, tyrannical regime. The reason that you may not realize this fact is due to either abject ignorance, or because, just like your illegitimate government, you have little desire for society to be organized according to holy and righteous principles, dharma, in Sanskrit. Just as a newborn child has absolutely no conception of what is most beneficial to its welfare, the vast majority of citizens have very little idea of what benefits society most. Hence the decadent state of contemporary culture. Although war is unfortunate, it is sometimes necessary to defend oneself from aggressors. In certain circumstances, it is justified for a ruler or an aspiring ruler to overtake another, evil and corrupt, ruler, and usurp his sovereignty. Unfortunately, in the modern era, it is nigh impossible for an aspiring king to seize power, since he will be easily defeated by sheer military might, as opposed to the state of affairs in ancient times, where two opposing monarchs would fight in hand-to-hand combat, or possibly, led their respective armies into a battle for the kingdom. War crimes. The mere fact that non-monarchical governments usually target innocent civilians in the course of battle, proves that they are illegitimate. An actual king strictly adheres to established rules of combat, and would rather forfeit his own life than murder a non-combatant. Apart from the non-targeting of civilian populations, the fundamental rules of war include the humane treatment of prisoners, avoiding the destruction of non-military property, weapons down from sunset to sunrise, plus the tactics and weapons used in war must be proportionate and necessary to achieve a definitive military objective. However, due to the extremely destructive magnitude of modern military arsenals, war is merely a matter of whichever party possesses sufficient artillery to destroy their enemies, as has been repeatedly demonstrated in recent centuries, as opposed to the scenario in ancient battles, which were largely comprised of hand-to-hand combatants, using relatively simple armaments. Therefore, the term war should not be used to describe the murderous barbarism of all military conflicts over the past few hundred years. See the Chapter 12 subsection regarding Hitler, for proof that those who obey the destructive orders of illegitimate rulers are morally culpable. I believe in political equality. But there are two opposite reasons for being a Democrat. You may think all men so good that they deserve a share in the government of the Commonwealth, and so wise that the Commonwealth needs their advice. That is, in my opinion, the false, romantic doctrine of democracy. That I believe to be the true ground of democracy. I do not believe that God created an egalitarian world. I believe the authority of parent over child, husband over wife, learned over simple, to have been as much a part of the original plan as the authority of man over beast. I believe that if we had not fallen, patriarchal monarchy would be the sole lawful government. Where men are forbidden to honor a king, they honor millionaires, athletes, or film stars instead, even famous prostitutes or gangsters. For spiritual nature, like bodily nature, will be served. Deny it food and it will gobble poison. From The Weight of Glory and Present Concerns. Clive Staples, C.S. Lewis. English author. If a nation does not want a monarchy, change the nation's mind. If a nation does not need a monarchy, change the nation's needs. Jan Christian Smuts. South African statesman, military leader, philosopher, and prime minister. For every monarchy overthrown, the sky becomes less brilliant, because it loses a star. A republic is ugliness set free. François Anatole Thibault, aka Anatole France. French author and poet. No tree has branches so foolish as to fight among themselves. Native American proverb. P.S. The reader may wonder why the words monarch, king, are almost invariably qualified with the adjective genuine, or sometimes the term authentic. This is simply due to the fact that the typical human has been thoroughly indoctrinated by his or her parents, teachers, as well as the mass media, to regard monarchy as intrinsically evil. Quite coincidentally, at the very moment this sentence is being composed, a veritable army of leftists, Adamavadan, in Sanskrit, in the United States of America, are taking to the streets of major cities, in order to violently protest the current president, Mr. Donald J. Trump, as they consider his edits and policies to be akin to that of a dictatorial leader. In fact, the name that these demonic scoundrels have given to their rallies is No Kings. How unfortunate it is that almost the entire human species regards monarchy as bad, wicked, evil, just because, throughout human history, practically every single so-called king, queen, was far from being a genuine ruler. The mere fact that no national leader in history was a compassionate vegan proves this particular assertion. The above paradigm applies also to the previous chapter, in relation to genuine members of the holy priesthood, Brahmana, in Sanskrit. The following quotations, by famous writers, illustrates how incredibly misled is most all humanity, in regard to the legitimacy of monarchy. Wherever, therefore, any number of men so unite into one society, as to quit everyone his executive power of the law of nature, and to resign it to the public, there, and there only, is a political or civil society. Hence it is evident that absolute monarchy, which by some men is counted the only government in the world, is indeed inconsistent with civil society, and so can be no form of civil government at all. From Second Treatise of Government. John Locke, English philosopher and physician. The happiness of a nation consists in true religion, piety, justice, prudence, temperance, fortitude, and the contempt of avarice and ambition. They in whomsoever these virtues dwell eminently, need not kings to make them happy, but are the architects of their own happiness. And whether to themselves or others are not less than kings. John Milton, English poet, polemicist, and civil servant. It was pitiful for a person born in a wholesome free atmosphere to listen to their humble and hearty outpourings of loyalty toward their king and church and nobility. As if they had any more occasion to love and honor king and church and noble than a slave has to love and honor the lash, or a dog has to love and honor the stranger that kicks him. Why, dear me, any kind of royalty, howsoever modified, any kind of aristocracy, howsoever pruned, is rightly an insult. But if you are born and brought up under that sort of arrangement, you probably never find it out for yourself, and don't believe it when somebody else tells you. It is enough to make a body ashamed of his race to think of the sort of froth that has always occupied its thrones without shadow of right or reason, and the seventh-rate people that have always figured as its aristocracies, a company of monarchs and nobles who, as a rule, would have achieved only poverty and obscurity if left, like their betters, to their own exertions. The truth was, the nation as a body was in the world for one object, and one only, to grovel before king and church and noble. To slave for them, sweat blood for them, starve that they might be fed, work that they might play, drink misery to the dregs that they might be happy, go naked that they might wear silks and jewels, pay taxes that they might be spared from paying them, be familiar all their lives with the degrading language and postures of adulation that they might walk in pride and think themselves the gods of this world. And for all this, the thanks they got were cuffs and contempt. And so poor-spirited were they that they took even this sort of attention as an honor. Samuel Langhorne Clemens, a.k.a. Mark Twain. American writer.